This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today, you'll meet Lauren Koster. Lauren is a dairy farmer, homeschooling mom of 3, and unintentional farm wife who found herself neck deep in cows and chaos after falling in love with a dairy farmer from southwestern Ontario. Lauren shares her candid journey from never having set foot on a farm to co-managing a herd of 60 cows, raising kids with muddy boots, and navigating the highs and lows of rural life. From building a new dairy facility to weathering the financial challenges that come with it, Lauren brings humor, honesty, and heart to her story. Today, we dig into the unique role of women in agriculture, the emotional weight of navigating online feedback, and the magic of raising your kids with dirt under their nails and the responsibility in their hearts. Whether you are deep in the farming world or just farm curious, this conversation will remind you that resilience, adaptability, and sometimes a good sense of humor can go a long way in the sometimes messy life in agriculture. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
Thanks, Caitlin. I am doing very well. Thank you.
I am so excited to dive into your story. I feel like there are going to be quite a few similarities between the two of us. So it'll be just like two girlfriends having a cup of coffee today. So you make my job very easy.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
For the listeners who are unfamiliar with you, Lauren, tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
So my name is Lauren Koster. I'm from southwestern Ontario, and that is where we are currently farming. My husband and I are dairy farmers along with our 3 kids that are 4, 6, and 8. And I always include them when I say that we're dairy farmers because dairy farming truly is, at least for us, a family affair. And I was not born into agriculture. I was raised close to Toronto. But my husband and I actually met in the Dominican on holidays, and we hit it off. And then now, 10 years later, we're farming together, and yeah, it's a pretty fun life.
That's cool. A lot of times when people tell me how they met their husband and they're millennials-ish, a lot of time people are meeting them online, which I very much met my husband on the internet. But meeting them on vacation, I think, is key because then you know they value vacation as a farmer.
Yeah. Don't ask me how many we've taken since. But it would would be kind of surprising on the low end.
Right. For sure. So growing up in the city and near Toronto, obviously a major urban center, I love to ask women who didn't grow up this way, what were some of your first memories around food and where food came from?
I find that question so hard to answer because I honestly don't know. I just didn't think about it. I didn't think about it at all. Food was from the grocery store. I remember my mom planting a garden, and she'll say now that she did it to educate us, but all I remember is we had this section in the back of our yard and it was just full of weeds all the time. I never actually remember growing any sort of food to eat. I just remember that square always being full of weeds. So that would probably be my mom's attempt at showing me where food came from, but I had never even stepped foot on a dairy farm or, come to think of it, any farm that produced food other than probably apple picking or strawberry picking before I met my now husband.
Yeah, the disconnect is definitely there for myself. Very similar in not knowing a damn thing about where my food came from. And regionally, like we are very agriculture based in where I am. There's farms everywhere, there's cows everywhere, but I didn't know what people were doing with those cows or how they ended up at the grocery store. So very similar, but it is a very good life lesson that your mom did teach you that weeds do grow when you try and grow food. So
Yeah, accurate.
all weeds, eventually flower, and some people value them as a flower that way, but most people in production agriculture do not.
Yeah, I have learned that.
So what was your first impression when you visited your husband's dairy farm? And how did that kind of start to create that perspective of farming for you?
My goodness, it's again hard to remember what I first thought, but I remember the pungent odors of the dairy farm and just thinking, my husband is also one of six siblings, and I remember when I met him on holiday, I knew one family that had five kids, and I just thought like, oh, people still do that. People still have that many kids, and when he was a farmer, like I was just learning all kinds of new things. But when I stepped into that dairy barn, I just I was in awe of the facility, and that was a tie stall barn built in the 70s. But I remember thinking it was extremely clean and just being amazed by, seeing where our milk comes from.
Right. The smell is always what's going to get anyone first, even, when we in our area. It's called Feedlot Alley. Like there are a lot of cows. There are more cows in our area than there are people. And the smell always gets the city people as soon as they come. I don't smell it anymore. The thing that I smell outside is silage more than I do manure.
That can also have a bad.
Exact. I'm not it's not the greatest smell for me, if I'm being honest, but
Yeah, depending on what stage of the fermentation process it is in.
yeah, exactly. So you obviously fell in love with a farmer and then got married. And tell us what that journey was like in really transitioning your life onto being on a farm.
Sure. So when I met my husband, he actually wasn't a farmer. He worked for a construction company. And that was mainly because he wanted to get some different experiences to make sure that farming is what he wanted to do. Also, I mentioned he's one of six kids, so he had three brothers who were also involved on the farm. So at that point, it was just finding room for everybody and finding a spot for everybody. And then again, if that's not what he really wanted to do, then that would eliminate finding a spot. But obviously, that is what he decided to do. And about 6 months into our marriage, they restructured the family farm. And my husband then started working there. So I remember when we were dating and he kind of said, or maybe we were engaged at this point, and he kind of said, so like, I do want a dairy farm. Kind of, are you in or are you out? But I really, at that point, I would help him milk on weekends when he was working on his family farm, and I would, help feed that they were not on any fancy feeding system. So I would be giving scoops of grain to the different cows. But I didn't really know what the whole lifestyle of dairy farming was. So when he kind of gave me that, are you in or are you out? I was like, yeah, I'm in. Like, you got me. And I guess in life, you never truly know what you're in for. But so he worked with his brother on their family farm for, if I'm doing the math right here, about 6 years before we branched out and split up in a good way on our own. So he would go at 4:30 in the morning off to work, and then he would come home for a fairly brief lunch, especially in the summer. In the winter, it would be longer, and then go back to his family farm, which was 10 minutes away, and then come home around 7 or 8 p.m. So at that time, too, I also found a job. I had moved to the area. Obviously, I mentioned that I lived an hour and a half from where my husband is, his family is where our farm is now. And I was just out of school, so I was deciding, do I get a job? And I went to school for social work, so do I go branch out into the cities and get a job there? But I decided to get a job closer to home at a calf research facility because I thought that would ultimately be a good investment for my future to figure out how to manage calves. So I worked there, and that turned into many years I worked there. So that was kind of my actual entry point into agriculture, was working at this calf facility while my husband was farming separately on their family dairy farm. Then 3 kids later, I stopped working at the calf research facility, and we started preparing for building our own barn to have where we were living. We moved on to one of the family farms, and that is where we built our current facility, and that was 2.5 years ago now. So we've been in our new robotic milking barn for 2.5 years.
Very cool. And I love what you said about kind of the lifestyle piece and your husband saying, like, are you in or are you out? And I think that is something that I feel a responsibility as a city girl who married into farming have to talk about, because we don't understand what this lifestyle entails in full, right? Like helping out on weekends or going for a romantic combine ride every harvest, right? Like those are the nice things and those are the things that do happen, but there's so many pieces behind the scenes that happen. So really explaining the full lifestyle of the ups and the downs when it comes to farming. I feel like I have a responsibility to talk about those things. What are your thoughts on that?
Do you mean a responsibility to talk about them to women that would be getting involved?
I think getting involved, and also women who have been born and raised in this industry that might look at us like, why is this so hard for them to understand?
Right. Yes. So I would definitely agree. And I also think that if you really did lay everything out, if you laid out all the points about, well, you can't really RSVP for an event because you don't know what the weather is going to be like. You can say you can respond to a wedding, but will two actually come? You won't know until the day of. And just little things like that for us, robot calls in the middle of the night. If I were to sit down with a woman who was in my situation 10 years ago, whose husband said, are you in or are you out? And laid all those things out for her, I don't know personally if I would have changed my answer, because you can spell all it out, but until you're living it, you really don't know what it's actually like.
Yep.
But in terms of women who have been raised in agriculture, I think that's amazing that they have had these things ingrained into them, and it's part of their lifestyle already. I've met a lot of women who say that they will never marry a dairy farmer or never wanted to marry a dairy farmer because they've grown up living it. I've also met a lot of people who have said that and are now married to dairy farmers. So yeah, I think it's really you like the lifestyle or you don't, and you either all the positives that you mentioned outweigh the negatives, or you just get carried along the stream and it is what it is.
The cows need to be milked. right? Like at the end of the day, that's what needs to happen. So, yeah, I always find it really interesting to have these conversations. And, looking back, your hindsight is 2020 of the good, bad, and otherwise. And I think the thing that I value the most about people who grew up this way is their ability to adapt to ever changing circumstances. Farmers are really obviously resilient people and can adapt to most situations without a lot of hesitation. They kind of just jump in with their boots on, and that's a quality that I've developed over the years, but it's definitely been harder for me.
Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. You took the word right out of my mouth there. With resiliency would definitely be one of the main words I would use to describe farmers.
Right.
Yeah, they can, their minds can work pretty uniquely.
Yes, absolutely. So talk to us about, the journey of building a new facility. That is an undertaking that many have probably thought about doing, but actually pulling the plug and doing it, that's amazing. So take us through that journey in building your own dairy operation and what that's looked like for you and your family.
Sure. So it's a pretty complex story. I'll try to keep it, brief, but we were actually on Dairy Farmers of Ontario. I'm not sure about different provinces in Canada, and then obviously it's really different in the States, but Dairy Farmers of Ontario has a program, and it's changed now since we've utilized it, but it's called the New Producer Program. So it gives new producers or people that want to get into farming a chance to try, or not try, but get involved. And we were on that wait list, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but when we signed up for it, right when my husband Eddy went back home and started working on the home farm, and at that time it was a 10-year wait list. And then I think in total we were on it for about 6 years before we received the quota, and quota is rights to sell milk. So we had a 6-year time frame, which it worked out perfectly for timing for when we were able to build a barn, because and the reason it went from 10 years to 6 years is some people will drop out, sometimes timing doesn't line up, sometimes DFO is ready to give the quota but the people don't have a barn built, or different variables like that. So our time was approaching, and we started doing research into building a barn. My husband does really love cows, so a lot of people that really love cows and milking will say I would never go with milking robots, because I just love milking the cows so much. So that was definitely a point that he was not so sure about at first, but he's also a big numbers guy. And when he was deciding what type of barn he wanted to build, he did a lot of research on cost of building. I don't think you can build a tie stall barn, which is when the cows are tied up in individual stalls and get milked individually installed. I don't think you're able to build that type of barn anymore. So it was essentially a parlor where cows get milked in groups, or a robot barn for us. And when you take the cost of square footage that you need to build a parlor barn, because the parlor takes up more space than the robots, and then you also need a holding area to put all the cows in before they get milked, whether it's all your cows or groups of cows, you need more square footage. So when that was compared with the cost of robots and the less square footage of the actual build, it made sense to go with robots. And there are other reasons too that we chose robots. Like, we really had a desire to be able to do it kind of all by ourselves, at least to start up. So robots eliminate the need to hire labor to help with the milking, and also, of course, the flexibility that robots offer, and just it's kind of the way of the future. And robots have been out for many years now, so we feel the kinks have been worked out, and it was a good time to jump in. So building the barn was a lot of fun for me as a city girl. One thing that I feel still very overwhelmed with is all of the mass amounts of debt that comes from farming. I was raised, my dad was a salesman, so I learned that you make money, you have some that you save, some that you give, some that you spend, but farming is completely different. So that's something I find very overwhelming, and still am, struggling with that on a basis as a whole. But it's rewarding in so many ways. and it's really cool to have been able to design a barn and build exactly what we want, and we really wouldn't change much about it.
I, as a person who has never milked a cow and has also never been in a dairy barn, whenever I hear producers talk about robots milking cows, like I always like blows my mind that they can just go in and literally have not much human contact in the whole endeavor, and we get milk and cheese and all of the good stuff that comes from that. So one thing that you did mention was the debt aspect of it. And when I hear robots, I think of debt, because I don't think robots are very inexpensive. For the new producer program, is there mentorship around these pieces for you, like to kind of get you started with the back end of the operation as well?
I don't believe so. I don't think that we had anything like that. No, I think it's just basically like they don't give you the quota. You have to pay for it. But otherwise, if they don't set it aside for new producers, then there's not really a chance for people to get into dairy because the amount of quota that's available to buy each month is very minimal. Just I won't get into the logistics, but so you're not going to buy, zero point 0.1 kilograms of quota. You can't even milk one cow. So
Right.
that's kind of how it works. But they didn't. I don't believe there's any sort of mentorship aspect.
It's interesting to me, right? Because when we're thinking about quota and when we're thinking about getting into the dairy industry, I would assume that most people who are on this wait list are coming from other dairy operations or at least have worked on a dairy operation prior versus, some person from the city just thinking like, wouldn't it be fun to milk cows twice a day, every day?
Yes, I would assume so as well. I get some messages on social media like, "How do I start up a dairy farm?" And I always just respond and say, "Well, have you like maybe start working on a dairy farm if
Right.
they don't already? If it's clear that they don't, and just to get a feel for what it actually is like before you jump in."
Absolutely. And I like that you brought up the social media piece because something that you have done and that you have worked on is showcasing your farm for everyone to see on social media. So, talk to me about how you started and why you started and what you've been doing.
Okay, so the why I started is because when we were started up in our new barn and cows were milking and things were going better, I remember taking a video of a little video tour and sending it to a friend of mine out in northern Ontario. And he had kind of said, "Oh, like you should start a YouTube channel. Like that was a really good tour." And then Eddy likes watching farmers on YouTube, and he when he's talking to other guys about YouTube channels, then they would always say, "You should start a YouTube channel." But my husband Eddy, like he knows less than. It's kind of funny because we're robot farmers, but when it comes to technology, like the other day he asked me how to send an e-transfer, so he would not know how to edit a YouTube video. But so that was kind of what sparked the idea. And then also, having not been from a farm, whenever my friends or family would come to check it out, all of them would just say, like, I had no idea farming was like this, whether people think cows are still milked by hand or they just don't think about it. Or some people think that barns are dark and dirty and grungy, and our barn is a new build, so it's high ceilings, it's bright, it's airy, there's optimal ventilation in the summertime. The barn feels nicer to be in than our unair conditioned house. So just a combination of that little spark, and then friends of mine and family saying they had no idea what dairy farming was like. I thought, well, why don't we show people? However, I learned fairly quickly. I was not very active on social media personally prior to that. And I learned very quickly that social media, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, quickly learns what you like and only shows you what you like. So, like I said, I wasn't active before. And then once I started a farming channel, all of a sudden, all of those platforms, all they would show me is farming content. So I learned fairly quickly that at least starting small, I'm actually not really reaching very many people that are that are not involved in farming and don't have much farming background. But I haven't let that discourage me yet, and I'm seeing it as a way to connect with other farmers and encourage other farmers. And some people will reach out to me and say, like, oh, I saw you do something this way and I changed the way I do it. It's way more productive. Or do you have tips on this? Because I saw the way that you have your calves organized and I really like how you do that. Can you send me a picture of your calf board? I want to copy it, and things like that. So that's very motivational to provide encouragement to others involved in it.
I think that it's so interesting. And it's completely valid. The algorithm, and you get to see what you want to see 9 times out of 10. And very much the same, like if you are interested in dairy farming, you're going to see dairy farmers. If you are interested in growing a no-till garden, you are going to get all of those things. And I think for me anyways, like I look at what I do and the audience that I hope to reach, and us sharing our stories for me is a way for us women in agriculture and rural living to connect versus trying to convince somebody that they should live rurally or they should drink milk from a cow versus an alternative because of whatever they thought of what dairy farming looked like. I'm curious if you have experienced maybe any negative pushback from folks who maybe are from outside of the egg industry and are against dairy in any way.
Yes, I definitely have. And it's been a learning experience for me fairly early on. And I've only been doing this for less than 2 years. But early on, I was posting kind of anything. And in the debate back and forth on whether to include my kids on social media or not is always in my mind. But I've currently taken the route of including them, not all the time, but just they're very much a part of my family. And truthfully, they would be hurt if I didn't include them. So I try to do it in what I think of as a safe way. But like, you can probably see where this is going. I posted a video of my son. He had said, I wish we weren't farmers. And so that's kind of how I titled the video. And then he comes out and I video him helping me feed the calves. And then I say at the end, I could have just let him say, yeah, wallow in self-pity, but that wouldn't have let me give the opportunity for him to help and say, you're a really good farmer, bud. And that particular video, all kinds of negative comments about it, how I'm abusing my children and abusing my animals because we have our calves and calf hutches, which you can't even, there's no point in even saying why you do things the way you do to comments like that. They're not going to listen. There's always just going to be something that they're going to say back. But I learned that if I'm going to include my kids, I need to be very intentional about how I do it, because that's ultimately hurtful for my kids when they grow up, and if they see that video and those comments, especially in, let's say, teen years, like that's very influential for them. So I have had pushback like that, or different. I'm trying to think of something else. But one time, again with my son, one time he wasn't feeling that good. And I just mean a sniffle, like he was tired. And I was pulling him around in our calf feeding wagon. And he was bundled up in his snowsuit, but like so much backlash about that, about how I should be treating my child when he's sick instead of doing things, and just accusing me of being an abusive parent and all these things. And I am a very sensitive person, but surprisingly am able to let those things just fly over my head, because you don't know who's behind the comments. And sometimes I just want to be like, well, I don't go and tear apart what you do for a living, but it is my choice to show on social media what we do, and it's their choice how they take it. And I've connected with some other people on social media. One thing that stood out to me when talking about negative comments was a wife of a man who has a YouTube channel said that when they get negative comments, they bless the person and then move on. And I thought, oh, that's a really nice way to handle that.
And while you were saying this, like I'm no stranger to a negative comment or two in my time, but honestly, when I think of it and when I think of the types of videos, that you are posting and just sharing what you do in your everyday life, as a person who grew up in the city, and if I didn't know anything about agriculture, I could potentially look at these videos that way, right? Because I don't understand. I don't understand the back part of it. And if they were willing to be open to learn, they would go and look and see why you do the things the way you do, right? And if they're not interested, they're not interested, right? And that's okay. I'm not interested in probably 95% of their careers or why they do what they do, right? But it is what it is. And honestly, I think the advocacy part and the education piece is so important in our industry, and for the folks who are willing to put their hand up saying like, I am tribute to showing you what we do on our farm to help share our stories. I commend you for doing that and doing it on YouTube. It is, I started a podcast so I didn't have to be on a camera or in public, and that really backfired on me 6 years later. But like, I want to commend you for sharing your story and sharing what your family does on your operation, because it is hard, and it's unfortunate that we have to have as thick of skin as we do, because we're still human and our feelings can still get hurt. But putting your hand up and saying like, I will show you what we do in order to really progress our industry, I have a lot of respect for that. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast. I want to talk about a piece that we kind of chatted about before we hit record, and that was a woman in agriculture and finding really what your place and your role is on individual operations and really in the industry as a whole. Talk to me about the progression of you really becoming a part of your operation with your family and with your kiddos and including them in that.
Right. So as I've said, my kids were already alive when we started farming on our own, and I didn't get very involved with the family farm when my husband was working there. I just thought it was best not to. But before we had kids, and as we were kind of, planning life and how things would go, the dream was, at that point to become a dairy farming team. And I had all these ideas of what that would look like and how involved I would be and what I would be able to do. And then I had kids, and that all changed. And also, again, this was kind of a more of a fantasy because we weren't actually living it yet. I didn't actually get to practice those dreams before having kids. And then the kids kind of became the dream. But it definitely looks different than even I would like it to some days. But it's very rewarding, I think, to be able to be involved with my husband. And I have certain things I manage on the farm. I manage our calf program. That doesn't mean I feed the calves every single calf feeding. My husband also does some of that too, but I do it enough that I'm able to manage it. I know how to do all of the main barn chores. I last summer learned how to drive a tractor. I did it once because my husband just says I would be way too slow. I may as well just do the barn chores so that he can be out in the fields doing the tractor work, because that's the phase we're in right now. And if I did the tractor work, I would have 3 kids in the cab with me and probably not be able to focus very well on what I'm doing. So it just works better for him to do the field work and me to be in the barn with the cows and the kids. Some days I wish I was involved more. Some days I wish that I could, be in the skid steer helping clean out barns, and that would give my husband opportunities to do other things. But I also homeschool our 3 kids, so I just don't have enough time in a day to do everything. And I just think our kids are young now, and then when they are grown, then maybe it will be my time to do more in the barn and to help out with more. I know it's a barn, but I still wish our barn could be cleaner. The cows will poop everywhere. So I wish I could be more involved with keeping things cleaner and with the cows and things like that. But that day may come. And I've spoken to many different female farmers, or I like to call women that are involved in a farm female farmers rather than farm wives, because I just think that title conveys more responsibility, which is more of a reflection of what their life probably actually is. So female farmers, I've talked to a lot of different female farmers, and we all have different ways of doing things. And some farms are generational farms where there's brothers and sisters and mums and dads there, and sometimes aunts and uncles helping and there to help with the kids and help with the farm work. And everybody either has their own individual roles or they share roles. And some farms are more like ours, where it's just us, and I don't have family close by to take care of kids to be out in the farm, which I'm not complaining. That's totally fine. That's the way we do it, and it works. And farming, like I said, for us is a family affair. We're often all out there together, and I love that for our kids. Not every day, because I don't want to paint a perfect picture for you. There's definitely a lot of tears and throwing hands up and all those things that go along with it. But I'm kind of losing my train of thought here with your initial question.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I think, we chatted about just the different phases of life. And you mentioned it too, like before having kids, you have the fantasy of like husband and wife team, and we're going to bring all of these kids along and they're going to, eventually run a skid steer themselves and like all of these things. But it takes a lot of work to get there. And I actually had a conversation with a friend now. I will say she's my friend now. I'm actually more friends with her mom, but we were chatting and she had mentioned something to me about how she can't wait until her kids are older so she can be a real farmer. And I was like, what do you mean a real farmer? And she's like, well, when I run the combine, I have 3 kids in here and all of these things. I'm like, I'm sorry. I think that makes you more of a real farmer because you can run, right, this piece of equipment with children crawling all over you and still bring a crop in. So like, to me, you're the ultimate real farmer, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. I look at women. Sorry, I look at women driving tractors with kids in the cab and combines and all that. And like, to me, that's amazing. I cannot imagine that.
Right. And it's just all like, it's all relative, right? And I think I love social media for bringing us all together. But I think specifically as women, sometimes we can be really mean to each other, but more or less we're mean to ourselves because we see people doing those things and we think, well, I could never do that. Or I've tried to do this and it's, it doesn't work for me. That's fine. That's fair. That's valid. My nephew, at one point, I was operating the grain cart and I told him, don't press any buttons. And he did. And it was like, what do I do? Right. So, like, there's pros and cons to all of these things. But the point I want to make here is I think as women in agriculture, we have to find our value in which phase we're in, because all of our phases of whether that's, as a new young farmer, a newlywed, or if you are having children or you're in your children phase, if you are in your public speaking podcast phase and you don't have time to do all of the things that you wish you could do, that's okay. You still have value to your operation, right? And I think we forget that really easily. And then we can feel like we're not doing enough when in reality, we're right alongside our partners. We are helping the operation in the way that we can and the way that we know how. And I think when we know better, we do better. And when we get to experience things, I think that's when we're going to learn to see where we fit in our operations and to see where we fit in, agriculture as a whole.
Yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right. My husband and I remind each other all the time that you can do everything, but you can't do everything well. And he's constantly reminding me of, which is so nice of him, but of the value I bring to the farm. Even if I haven't stepped foot in the barn for a week, he'll remind me of all the things that I'm doing to keep him afloat and to keep the family afloat. And that's really helpful for me when I get in my head and I see, like you said, all the other people doing everything else that I'm doing nothing. Like that's, my mind.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes there isn't a definition for your role in the farm and you just get through it and you just show up and you do it, or maybe you're not showing up and that's your current role. Like you said, there's different phases for everything and it's going to look different. You can't necessarily have that all mapped out because you just don't know.
Right. You don't know until it happens. And like we had said before, I can picture a really good fantasy of what I think it should look like. And in reality, it can be the exact opposite of what I've laid out.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, as a first generation farmer yourself, what messages do you have for young Lauren? If you could go back and tell young Lauren one thing about entering or considering entering a different role in agriculture or a role in general in agriculture, what words of encouragement do you have?
So we didn't plan this, but I think the first thing that came to my mind is to stay positive, because with farming, it's so easy to get wrapped up in all the things that have gone wrong and all the things that you're missing out on and all the things that, grass is greener on the other side. But if you stay positive, and I would have told myself back then to keep a gratitude journal and every day just write one thing that I was grateful for, and to be able to look back on that and see all the blessings that have happened over the years. That is what I would tell a young version of myself. And that is what I have to keep reminding myself, because it's not always easy and that doesn't always come first nature. And it will just realistically, like, it's not always positive. So, like, nothing is, but you have to work to remember the good things about what you're doing day to day.
And I love what you said. It's really easy to find the negative, especially when there are so many things outside of your control. But if you could focus on what is in your control, and gratitude is something that we all have, or that we should all have, probably pretty easy to find at least one good thing that happened to you in a day, even if you had a
Yes.
really, really bad day.
I've been able to, in the days I've been practicing that, there's usually when you sit down and think of it, there's quite a few things that you can actually write down.
Yeah, for sure. You had mentioned, having a partner who really shares with you the value that you bring to your operation, which I have to tell you is a treasure.
Yeah.
In farming partnerships and in partnerships in general, I think that's a really easy thing to forget. But I want to turn that back on you. What are you most proud of the things that you do for your farm and the value that you bring to the farm?
Okay, wow, that's another one I'm not prepared for, but I guess I'm proud of showing my kids that even when I don't want to do something, I'm showing up and doing it. Any mother can really portray that to their kids. You don't have to be a farmer, but that's probably one thing I take pride in, is showing them the responsibility of taking care of animals. And I'm really grateful that I had the experience at that calf research facility to develop great protocols for our farm. And it's really fun to be able to work with individual calves that are ours instead of treating all calves as equals, because when you're doing research, that's what needs to be done. But I really enjoy being able to, if one calf is growing slower, you can keep them on milk longer. If one calf is really taking off, you can maybe wean them a little earlier. Not that we usually do, but I'm quite proud of our calf management on our farm. That would be one thing, and then showing the kids. Yep.
Very good. What's next for you and your family farm, and what's next for you in sharing your story online?
That's another good question. What's next for the family farm is, right now we do not have any projects planned. At least that's what I tell myself. My husband would tell you something different, but there always seems to be something on the list of something to build or concrete to pour. If you want to know the ticket to a farmer's heart, it is concrete. You might think it was, gold or silver, but it's concrete. I've learned that. So no specific goals on the farm other than with the YouTube channel we have and my social media presence. I've had some really interesting brands reach out to me in wanting to do some partnerships. So that's kind of a segue into the next question you had about what's next for the social media portion of what I do. We're really excited to try out some things that we believe will benefit our farm. And I'm just hoping to grow and be able to reach more people, whether that's encouraging or educating, and see where that takes me.
All good things, and I'm excited to follow along and see where it all takes you, and to see how much concrete you're going to pour in 2025.
Yes, stand by.
My last question for you, Lauren, is what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
This ties back into what I'm most proud of, in that is raising rural kids. I think they're, like we were talking about at the beginning of the show here, how people raised and specifically women raised in agriculture just are resilient and have a different way of looking at life. And I'm really interested to see how that plays out in my own kids. We have 2 girls and a boy, and I was thinking yesterday, we have these giant snow piles on our property, and I was thinking I used to have to walk 3 blocks to the local Max Milk parking lot to play on those snow piles, but my kids just get to walk outside and play in their yard. And I just see, having not grown up on a farm, I see the blessings everywhere that the kids get to have in the just in their day-to-day life. And the most beautiful thing is that they recognize that, and they're thankful for all the space they have, and they're constantly making connections of things that is different about our life than other people's, and they usually have a pretty positive spin on it. So that's nice to see.
I love that. And I love that they have that positive outlook now versus, maybe when they're older and looking back and recognizing it then. It's always great to have those key moments now when they're little too. So that's awesome. Lauren, for the folks who would like to connect with you online, where can they find you?
So we have a YouTube channel. It's called Dairy Farm Kind of Life. So it's a spin-off of the song Semi Charm Kind of Life. Anyway, on there, that's our YouTube channel. And then also that's just where I am on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well.
Perfect. And I will link all of those in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with me today. I truly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.